The Kings might be done making moves for this offseason. Monte McNair did an interview with Sacktown Sports 1140 with Jason Ross. A pretty lengthy interview. And so there's definitely some interesting things that he said in there. So I thought I'd get on here talk about it because I think the biggest question mark for the rest of the offseason is kind of like, is Kevin Huerter going to still be on the roster? Is another move coming for either a Kuzma type or a Cam Johnson or a Dorian Finney-Smith type of player to reinforce the wing depth, which is obviously a need for the Kings? And so Monte McNair talked about how this core that we have right now is the core that's going to be most likely going into training camp. Obviously, a trade could come out of nowhere, a deal could come out of nowhere if it's too good to pass up, but pretty much he was just saying with the deals that are out there right now that he could possibly do, he doesn't want to do them, I guess, at this point. So this is the group that we're going into training camp with, and I think that's a fine plan, but also we have to discuss the use of the word core. Like, what does core mean? When I think core, I think of Fox, I think of Monk now that he's re-signed, I think of Keegan, Sabonis, and now add DeMar DeRozan to that. So I think of those five players as the core of this team. But that still leaves a starting spot possibly open, which I've discussed before, and obviously it leaves the bench other than Malik Monk's spot if he's not starting. But I don't think he would come out and say this. First of all, like, why would he come out? He didn't have to say that. He didn't have to say that. He wasn't really directly asked. He just came out and said, like, this is the core that we're going into training camp with. Could he be lying? Could he be trying to drive down prices? Sure, but I just don't think that's really the case. I do think he is being truthful here. And so, no, a guy like Kevin Huerter, I wouldn't consider core, but I still think from the way that he said it, it just feels like no more deals are going to be made at all. And I think if you're trading a guy like Kevin Huerter, you're hopefully trading him for someone that can become a core piece, depending on, again, how you really define the term core. But pretty much, I just don't think a trade is coming from him saying that. And I talked about before we got into this offseason how I was nervous. I was nervous that the Kings weren't going to make any moves because they still had a little bit of time before the team gets expensive. They might not make any moves in the offseason because I didn't really consider free agency as a track that they could go to really improve the team. And obviously that's what happened with DeMar DeRozan, but I'm thinking trades, right? And that's what everyone was thinking. The DeMar DeRozan free agency thing just kind of came out of nowhere for everyone, I think. And so when you have to make trades to make the team better, you can get kind of put into a desperate position. And I don't think that our front office has very much shown the willingness to be patient and that they're not going to overpay for players. You look at the Rashawn Holmes salary dump, like that was a salary move to then go try to make another move, and it just never really materialized because Kyle Kuzma didn't want to come on whatever they were offering him, and they didn't want to offer anymore. And, they couldn't get other guys, and they're not going to overpay for those guys, so they're just going to re-sign their guys and move on. And that's what happened. And so, like, the Rashawn Holmes salary dump move was kind of a failure because nothing materialized. But they showed that they were willing to be patient. And so I think a lot of other teams during this offseason, they're kind of having their prices set really high. I mean, you look at what's going on with Markkanen right now, and then you look at Brandon Ingram and just other guys like that, like Kyle Kuzma. If the Wizards don't get their asking price, they're just going to ride out his deal until they get what they want because he's on a very solid deal. Markkanen, they'll probably re-sign him, extend him, and then they can trade him at the trade deadline. And maybe the same for Brandon Ingram. And so the team might have had to overpay for those guys, which is why I was nervous that the Kings weren't really going to be able to do anything, at least not until the trade deadline. And that's why it was so important that they got DeMar DeRozan in free agency, because that had to be done in free agency. They didn't have to overpay. The Bulls were the ones that were desperate to just get anything for DeRozan at that point. And so we weren't the desperate ones. And so that's why getting DeMar in free agency in a sign and trade was so key. So you didn't have to overpay, or you didn't have to wait until the trade deadline with the roster as is. And so now it makes sense more to wait for the right deal to come around. The front office isn't going to overpay. They're not just going to, salary dump Kevin Huerter. He's still a valuable player. I know he hasn't been good off the bench. I mean, could he still start? Probably not. Like, I still think Keon and Malik at this point are probably over him. But again, we've never really seen Kevin Huerter come off the bench except for a few games when Chris Duarte was starting. But he's still a positive player. He's not a player that we're just going to give away for free. He's not a player that we just want to get off the salary of. We want to get something back for him. And so hopefully he can play well next season and contribute to this team. And then at the trade deadline, possibly a move could be made. But still, if there's not a move that's there to be made that this front office likes, then I still think they're going to be patient and they're still not going to overpay even at the trade deadline, especially if the team is playing well. And when you have a guy like DeMar DeRozan and add him to a team that was already playing well, it makes it a lot easier in the Western Conference, because we saw last season the Kings were good and they were, a top 6 team when fully healthy, but they didn't have that depth. So when those injuries came, it really hurt. Now the Kings are better positioned to be able to withstand the injuries, and they can be patient and not be the desperate team that's going to overpay for a player. And so I think the Kings are just waiting for those prices to go down, because they do still need wing players. But we've seen the last 2 seasons, the Kings have, when you think about Keegan Murray's rookie season, Harrison Barnes was maybe a little better defensively, but really the Kings had like 0 really good wing defenders. And then Keegan last season took a step to become a good wing defender. And so then we had one. We've survived without the wing defense up until this point. And so hopefully we can survive until the trade deadline and then hopefully get some more wing defense. Right now, Kevin Huerter is the backup 3 if he's not the starting 2. And it's not the worst position to be in. No, Kevin Huerter's not going to go out there and give you the athleticism and the defense that you need from a wing, but at least he's 6'7" and long and still a good player. But things that Monte McNair said, he said they'll be patient with the last roster spots, wait on that a little bit going into training camp. And he said they're going to be used on forwards, wings, forwards, bigs. He's happy with the guards that we have. He also said he's happy with Alex Len, and Alex Len's going to play a big role for the team next season. And I hope he does. And I hope he just gets that starting spot at the 5. Like, sure, Trey Lyles can play the small ball 5 if necessary in certain situations, but I think Alex Len is the backup 5. And then he mentioned Kevin Huerter quite a bit as a player that can play well off DeMar DeRozan and is still a very good, offensive player for this team. So he seems happy with Kevin Huerter, at least is trying to make it seem that way, make it seem like he's not desperate to trade him. And I don't think he is desperate to trade a guy like Kevin Huerter. I think he just is willing to trade him, but not desperate. And so we're just at the point where it's like, can we trust whoever is our starting 2 guard? Can we trust Keon Ellis? Hopefully we can. If he plays like he did last season, we can. But, I kind of expect a little bit of a rocky season for Keon. Like, his second year was just like, it was so flawless when he was given the time. I don't know, I just don't really expect that. It's like when Kevin Huerter was amazing his first season with the Kings, and then it went downhill a little bit. It's like you can expect a little bit more of a roller coaster ride, I feel like. But I think the Kings have enough options to where they're going to be able to find the right solution at the starting 2 guard, or just whoever the backups are. Because like I said, they have their 5 core players. You have Trey Lyles, who's solid. You have Alex Len, who's solid. And then hopefully Keon Ellis continues to be solid. Kevin Huerter can get back to being solid. That's a pretty good team. And then you bring in a guy like Jordan McLaughlin, who hopefully can continue to be a good 3-point shooter and be a good defender while Devin Carter is out. I think Jordan McLaughlin is a serviceable player. And so I think you're looking at a solid team that can wait to make moves until other teams kind of decide on directions and lower their prices on certain players and are willing to part with certain players. Like if certain guys on the Wizards, their young guys are making a leap and they want to give them more time, then maybe the Wizards are like, okay, let's get off of Kyle Kuzma now. And then maybe that price comes down from 2 first-round picks to like 1 and a solid player. In other words, Kevin Huerter and a first-round pick. But I just can't get over like how important it was to get DeMar DeRozan in this free agency. And how I had never expected the Kings to upgrade so much in free agency. Like that just didn't seem like an option. But it was so key because it just puts the Kings in so much better of a spot, gives them so much more flexibility, and hopefully it does work out and it fits well. Obviously that's to be seen, but I just can't really see a world where DeMar isn't going to make this team better. It's just how much better is he going to make this team? But we've seen the last 2 years, the Kings, when healthy, were fine in the West, top 6 in the West. And so hopefully it means they can continue to be that, and they can continue to possibly be top 6 in the West, even if they are hit with inevitable injuries. But obviously we never know what Monte McNair in the front office is really going to do. Is he just saying this because he's keeping his cards close to his chest? Maybe. I don't really see why he would do that, but it's possible. I'm pretty happy with where the Kings roster is at this point. I think he is too. There are still obvious spots of needs, but he's obviously aware. He said those last 2 roster spots are going to be used for size, and he talked about wanting to get bigger and longer, and those 2 roster spots will be used on that. Are those players probably going to make a difference? Probably not. But there's a reason you have those roster spots, and it's because it's always possible that those guys do end up making an impact, just like a Keon Ellis. So anyways, that is it for this episode of the Roll Report. I will be back whenever there's more news or just later on to recap some Summer League. I got my California Classic shirt here that I got on the day that the Kings signed DeMar DeRozan. That will always be a part of this shirt. And so I will see you guys later. Peace.